Over half of 2024 is over as of this video's release. There's nothing special about the beginning of a year in San Francisco versus anywhere else. You get a fireworks show if the weather cooperates and you're willing to climb to a vantage point. Resolutioners take advantage of New Year's deals to pack gyms before giving up on Valentine's Day after realizing it takes more than a month and a half to undo the years of damage they're trying to reverse. Damaged is also how I would describe the discarded Christmas trees on the streets, the final physical metaphor of a bygone year. Okay, I tried to think of a more clever metaphor, and that's all I could come up with. And of course, winter days are short, so much of daily life in the city is experienced under the lights. Much of daily life during this time of year is also experienced under California's Mediterranean climate is known for its droughts, but those who don't live here are probably not aware of the torrential downpours during autumn and winter. This is life in San Francisco at the bookends of each year. In 2024, I learned what an atmospheric river is. Over the past year, I've been enchanted by rainy day video and photography. I never know what I'm going to use the media for, but I'm always drawn to capturing the rain. If you're a runner, you'll experience a lot of this in January. I'll talk more about running in a bit, but first you need to see what kinds of dynamic skies winter produces over San Francisco during the breaks between storms. In late 2023, I began taking running seriously again. But as of this video, my 2024 race logs only include a marathon in March, a marathon in July, and a 5K in January that made me realize I hate live running events. I hate getting up at the ass crack of dawn to get carbs into my system. I hate having to find a ride to the starting line. I hate starting the race behind a sea of runners who line up in the 6-minute per mile corral only to run 8 to 10 minute per mile pace, forcing me to expend way too much energy weaving in and out of them to pass them. But at least there's this guy.
Hey.
Alhambra's Anthony Lay getting it done.
Oh, thank you.
As much as I've quickly grown to hate running in live races, the silver lining to these events is that it forces me to see parts of San Francisco I rarely get out to, especially early in the morning. I scheduled a 16-mile training day on the day of the Hot Chocolate 5K run. The 5K race covered 3 of those miles, so I ran the entire 5 miles back to my apartment across town to bring the total miles for that day to 8. Coming across this fascinating house is an example of that aforementioned silver lining of live events enabling me to discover parts of San Francisco I rarely get out to. I completed the remaining scheduled 8 miles that night to bring the total to 16 for that day. In March, I did a little experiment. I tested switching my workouts from evenings to mornings after growing tired of being burdened by the thought of having to work out later in the day. And I haven't looked back since. While I'll never really be a morning person, there's an obvious value to doing the hardest thing in the morning, but there's also value to this. I'm kicking myself for how many San Francisco sunrises I slept through during my decades of doing evening workouts and staying up late. And now I will no longer bore both you and myself with running content. Since most of March is still technically winter, the month is never entirely dry. But the month does leave clues around San Francisco that spring is just around the corner. Following the emergence of plant life is the emergence of human life, as the increasing amounts of sunlight signals to the most primal parts of our brains that it's sufficiently safe to come out of our hibernation caves. There's just something different about walking down the streets or through parks during springtime. This is the time of year San Francisco comes to life. When the rare rainy day does arrive in the middle of the season, I embrace it in a way that's impossible for my jaded winter mind to do during the torrential downpours of winter. almost as if for a moment I actually miss walking through soggy cold streets, motivating me to grab my camera to capture what will probably be the last storm until no earlier than late October. And we're back to normal. Speaking of normal, there's nothing more normal than an old favorite. Old favorites are like warm blankets, whether they're go-to food establishments, go-to places, or go-to activities. These are some of my old favorites in the food category. Little Sichuan is my go-to place for Chinese food. Check out the effort they put into their DoorDash packaging. Golden Boy is my go-to place for pizza. I don't know how they do it, but all of the ingredients on their pizza hit just right. Admittedly, I could still afford to further stress test this as my favorite considering just how many pizza places this city has, but for now, Golden Boy remains on top. I have a slight dark chocolate addiction, and one of the places I get my fix is a candy store in North Beach called Z Chocolate. San Francisco also has multiple Ghirardelli locations, though I most often visit the one on Market Street. If I want something more pure, I'll get it from Dandelion Chocolate in the Ferry Building. If you want to know what I mean by pure, just look at how many ingredients are in their chocolate. There are also a number of See's Candies shops in the city that I'll visit once in a blue moon, even though they won't let me film inside. The chocolate subject is another one I can stress test given the number of chocolate/candy shops San Francisco has. Some of my other San Francisco pastimes include the occasional coyote sightings, watching birds, watching ferries, walking through Yerba Buena Gardens, visiting North Beach, occasionally visiting Union Square, and walking around Fisherman's Wharf and Pier 39. When I go to Pier 39, I often check the sea lion area for any activity before walking around or through the pier. It's not a bad place if you like sea lions, views of Alcatraz, and can tolerate crowds enough to not lock yourself at home. In February, there were a few sea lions. When I returned 3.5 months later, there were more. On the rare occasion that I want to immerse myself in a crowd, I'll walk through Pier 39. If I want to do even more people watching, I'll walk the entire length of Fisherman's Wharf. While Pier 39 and Fisherman's Wharf were my go-to sightseeing and people-watching places in past years, Chinatown has grown on me this year. Day, night, busy, empty. There's a certain charm to Chinatown that I can't really explain. Even though it's a bit of a cliche tourist trap, I often find myself here when I need to go on a walk to clear my head or just get some air. One of the things that happens to someone who's lived in San Francisco for almost 9 years and captured as many video clips and photos as I have is that you become jaded. Even in a city as dynamic as San Francisco, you eventually run out of novel sights and sounds of the city to experience. This forces you to see the city from different angles, try to capture serendipitous moments, and attend either more or local events than you normally would. This is why you've probably noticed an uptick in baseball content I produced in 2024. For me, the simplest way of seeing the city from different angles is by zooming in. Zooming in enables me to notice the scene within a scene, the frame within the frame. By doing this, I realized this is where life happens. This is where the city breathes. This is also where you discover a city's hidden gems. Speaking of angles, I needed a new camera lens that would enable me to get into the NFC Championship game with my Sony a6600. My default lens is the 18 to 135mm zoom that enabled me to capture the zoom shots you saw in the previous chapter. But unfortunately, that lens is longer than the 3-inch limit allowed by Levi Stadium camera policy rules. The problem is that I bought the NFC Championship tickets on such short notice that there were no smaller zoom lenses available for either purchase or rent at any camera stores in the Bay Area that I would have been able to get my hands on before the game. Thankfully, Amazon had a 16 to 50mm Sony lens available, and for next day shipping. Say what you want about Amazon, but it was the only option here. If you've seen my 57-minute NFC Championship video, these are the behind-the-scenes logistics that made it possible. While I had a bad feeling about the Super Bowl, that didn't stop me from wanting to capture the fan atmosphere at a bar. So I headed to the Mission District intending to create my first game day vlog in which I'm not actually at the stadium. Because who wants to fork over $5,000 for the cheapest seats at a 3-hour event in a city that I want to avoid driving to for the foreseeable future? After walking around the Mission for a bit, I didn't exactly find the vibe I was looking for, so I headed back to my apartment to watch the game solo.
Super Bowl 58 starts now!
For the 0 of you who asked about my opinion of Taylor Swift, I don't have strong feelings about her. I can understand why she bothers some people, and I can understand why Swifties exist. Personally, I don't possess the insecurities required to find her offensive in any way. As for the game, the result aligned with my expectations as a 49ers fan who's seen them play against Patrick Mahomes a number of times.
And this was the Andy Reid special. This was the Andy.
Anyway, it's baseball season.
He's gonna fake.
I mentioned in the Jaded chapter that one of the reasons for the significant increase in baseball content I produced in 2024 is due to forcing myself to go to more local events. While there's truth to that, it's also due to me buying into the hype coming into this season due to the Giants' busy offseason of adding high-profile players to the roster. So, of course, I had to see Blake Snell's Giants debut. This wasn't Snell's sharpest game, but at least I got to see Jung-Hoo Lee play for the first time. The Giants getting throttled at home by a bad team foreshadowed my frustrating experience with this 2024 San Francisco Giants team. They lost each of the first 4 games I went to. In those games, they could barely hit the ball out of the infield. And of those 4 games, this is the only one that was even competitive. That Luis Matos home run is the only home run a Giant has hit in the 5 games I've gone to this season. And yet, every Giants opponent had at least one player homer. And in 3 of the 5 games I've gone to, the Giants opponent hit multiple home runs. But hey, baseball is still baseball, which means it's still an experience. I've gotten to see superstar players from throughout the league. I lucked out on getting a Willie Mays bobblehead just 6 days before his passing. There were some interesting on-field moments that actually include some Giants baseball highlights. And the Giants did manage to pull out the victory in the last game I went to. While going to Giants games has been one of my traditions for years, 2024 has come with some San Francisco firsts. This is the first time I can remember ever seeing a Tesla Cybertruck, and I laugh a little inside each time I spot one in the wild. There also seems to be a new open streetcar added to this city's collection of streetcars. And I'm seeing driverless cars everywhere now, including this Waymo I spotted stopped in the middle of a crosswalk. Speaking of cars, here in my 9th year in San Francisco, I finally decided to ride a cable car on a day in which I was too lazy to walk just a few blocks home. I also gave a new pizza place a try, and while this technically happened at the end of last year, it's proof that I'm not completely stuck on Golden Boy pizza, though I still have Golden Boy as number 1 on my pizza power rankings because Joyride's pepperoni pizza is a little on the salty side. Everyone knows the Mark Twain quote about San Francisco summers, but truthfully, most of San Francisco summer is just mild, sunny days between 65 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the place that people from outside of the Bay Area escape to when they don't want to deal with their unbearable summers. But San Francisco isn't entirely immune from nationwide and statewide heat waves. If an especially strong high-pressure zone hits the western part of the country with widespread 110-plus degree temperatures like it did in early July, San Francisco can get warm, though it will still rarely reach 90 degrees Fahrenheit even when it's 115 everywhere else.
Rides up to the Wharf, folks. Pier 39.
But Mark Twain's quote isn't entirely wrong because summer is when San Francisco gets most of its signature fog, which is mostly present in the early morning before it gets burned off in late morning and then returning in the evening after the marine layer swoops in. This is when temperatures dip significantly, and combined with the wind can feel like winter has taken over. So if you hate the heat as much as I do, San Francisco is the ideal place for outdoor summer events. The 3 most prominent ones I can think of are Pride Weekend in late June, Independence Day on July 4th, and the San Francisco Marathon in late July. It's important to note that the visibility of July 4th fireworks depends on how much the weather cooperates. In the often foggy San Francisco summers, that's a coin flip. But most importantly, summer is just about getting outdoors and enjoying the environment regardless of whether or not you leave the city and regardless of whether or not there are outdoor events to stumble upon. I often find myself on Market Street. I'm drawn to the way its flow maintains the city's life the way a major artery maintains a human life. This is the place to be if you're fascinated by the mundanity of daily life in a major city, whether it's commuters experiencing it for the 1000th time, tourists experiencing it for the first time, or construction workers changing the way everyone will experience it in the future. Once upon a time, Market Street terminated at the Ferry Building, which is fitting since the Ferry Building is just a large indoor market. When I'm not getting chocolate, I'm usually just walking through here to soak up the atmosphere. I do the same thing at Embarcadero Plaza, which is where Market Street now terminates. I often visit Marlon Beaver's booth when he's there. He's a local artist who sells t-shirts with his San Francisco art printed on them. He didn't ask me to promote his work, but I'm going to do it anyway since he gives a lot of emotional support to the creative work I do. So, if you ever visit his booth, then tell him Raymond sent you. Whether it's Embarcadero Plaza, the Ferry Building, or Market Street, this Market Street corridor is one of my go-to places when I just sort of want to feel the life of the city. Probably because this is the part of the city that brings together the greatest collection of all types of San Francisco people. Natives, commuters, merchants, tourists, and others. Like many of my videos, this video didn't need to exist aside from one silly reason. Much of my life in San Francisco is made up of me just walking around the city capturing photos and video clips of anything I consider remotely interesting in that moment, even if I can't quite explain what draws me to that scene in that moment. These images then get buried on my hard drives indefinitely until I'm able to craft a story around them that gives them life, like this 8-page Google Docs script. Much like a tree in a forest that no one is around to hear, would any of these images effectively exist if they were never shared?